She sat at the edge of the classroom, her notebook open but her eyes often wandering out the window. The sunlight fell gently on her hair, but no one seemed to notice. In a room filled with laughter, chatter, and the constant movement of classmates, she was almost invisible. She wasn't shy because she didn't want to speak. It was just that nobody ever seemed to look her way. Her classmates laughed at jokes she didn't hear and shared stories she was never a part of. She had a few acquaintances, people she could say hi to in the hallway, but she had no one who truly saw her, not really. Every day felt the same. She would arrive at school with a small backpack, full of carefully packed books and a little lunch she sometimes ate alone. She walked in quietly, keeping her head down, and found a seat where she wouldn't disturb anyone. Teachers spoke to her politely when needed, but she rarely received praise even when she completed every assignment perfectly. The world around her seemed to have invisible boundaries she could never cross. The popular kids had their groups, their jokes, their shared secrets, and she was on the outside. No one made an effort to include her, and she didn't try to force herself into their circles either. She had learned early on that being ignored was easier than facing constant rejection. Despite this, she carried a quiet determination within her. She liked to watch people, not in a nosy way, but to understand them. She noticed the small things: how a boy fiddled with his pen when nervous, how a girl tucked her hair behind her ear when thinking, or how a teacher's voice softened when praising a student. She remembered these details because, in her solitude, she had time to observe, and in observing, she learned about the world in ways others didn't. She had hobbies, things that filled the quiet hours of her day. She loved reading, not just stories but articles, essays, and anything that allowed her to explore ideas beyond the classroom walls. She liked drawing, capturing the scenes she imagined in her mind, from distant forests to bustling streets filled with people she would never meet. And she loved writing, though she kept most of her stories in a small worn notebook hidden at the bottom of her backpack. Writing gave her a voice when no one else was listening. In her stories, she could be seen, she could be heard, and she could create worlds where kindness and recognition were never in short supply. Even though her talents were hidden, she had moments where she longed to share them. She sometimes imagined standing in front of the class reading a story she had written, or showing a drawing she had worked on for days. But every time the fear returned, the fear of being laughed at, ignored, or told she wasn't good enough. So she kept her gifts to herself, tucked away like precious treasures in a chest no one else had the key to. The other students rarely noticed her. In group assignments, she was often left to herself or given minor roles. When the teacher divided the class, people would scramble to join teams, whispering and giggling as they pulled friends together. She usually ended up in the leftover spots, quietly accepting it, not because she liked being ignored, but because she had no choice. Her contributions, though always accurate and often creative, were overlooked in the rush to favor the louder, more outgoing students. Lunchtime was another challenge. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation, with cliques gathering around tables and sharing jokes. She would often carry her tray and look for an empty spot at the far end, somewhere she wouldn't draw attention. Sometimes she tried to approach a group, offering a smile or a comment, but most of the time she was met with polite nods or distracted responses. There were moments when she felt the sting of rejection, but she had grown resilient. She learned to find comfort in her own company, finding joy in small pleasures, the taste of her sandwich, the warmth of the sun through a window, or the pages of a book she had been saving for the day. Her home life was different. Her family appreciated her quietly, recognizing her efforts and encouraging her to pursue her interests. They noticed her drawings, her stories, and her dedication to learning, often offering praise that the school never gave. But even at home, she sometimes felt a longing for recognition beyond those walls. She wanted to be seen in a larger world, not just by her family, but by people outside who could appreciate her for who she was. Despite being ignored, she had a gentle heart. She would notice when someone was sad and offer a quiet word or a small gesture, even if no one returned the kindness. She never did things for recognition. It simply felt natural to care. Teachers sometimes observed her empathy, though they rarely connected it with her quiet brilliance. She had a way of understanding people without needing to speak, a depth that went unnoticed in a world obsessed with noise and visibility. Her classmates, meanwhile, were caught up in their own worlds. They chased popularity, sports victories, and social approval. They didn't notice the girl who always sat quietly in the corner, whose notebook pages were filled with incredible stories, whose sketches captured details others missed, and whose ideas could light up discussions if she ever spoke up. It wasn't that they were cruel, they simply didn't see her. People are often blind to what isn't loud, and in her silence she blended into the background, but she didn't let invisibility crush her spirit. She understood that recognition would not come immediately, and that sometimes the world overlooks those who quietly build their strengths. She worked steadily day by day, honing her skills. Every drawing, every story, every careful note in class was a step toward something greater, though she didn't yet know what it would be. She believed in the power of persistence even when the world around her seemed indifferent. There were small sparks of hope that kept her going. A teacher who smiled at a particularly good essay, a classmate who complimented a sketch, or even a fleeting moment of pride when she mastered a difficult concept in math. These small acknowledgments were like drops of sunlight in her otherwise shadowed days. She collected them quietly, storing them in her heart as reminders that she was capable, even when the larger world failed to notice. She also imagined a future where she would not be ignored. In her mind, she pictured moments where her work mattered, where her voice was heard, and where people admired her not for her popularity, but for her talent and determination. These visions were her private fuel, driving her through the mundane and sometimes painful days of being overlooked. She dreamed of applause, of nods of approval, of moments when people would finally see her for who she truly was. The story of her quiet life was not filled with dramatic confrontations or loud arguments. It was made of small everyday struggles, walking down crowded hallways, raising her hand only to be overlooked, trying to join conversations that never quite welcomed her. It was a story of patience, resilience, and the quiet hope that one day, all her efforts would matter. She didn't complain, and she didn't give up. She learned to navigate the world in her own way, finding joy in the little victories that often went unnoticed by everyone else. Even on the hardest days, she found ways to hold on to herself. When someone ignored her comment in class, she reminded herself that it didn't define her. When she watched others celebrate achievements she had quietly surpassed, she felt a twinge of disappointment but never resentment. Instead, she turned her attention to her work, to her stories, to the things that made her unique. She understood that recognition is not always immediate, and sometimes, the quietest people make the loudest impact when the time comes. By the end of each day, as she packed her bag and walked home, she felt a mix of fatigue and quiet satisfaction. The world outside her window, the laughter of classmates, the unnoticed brilliance she carried, all of it was part of her journey. She knew that being invisible now did not mean she would always be invisible. Her patience, her skill, and her determination were slowly building toward a moment when people could no longer ignore her. And so she continued, day by day, carrying her notebooks, her sketches, her ideas, and her dreams. The world may not have noticed her yet, but she was growing in ways that mattered deeply. Every story she wrote, every sketch she drew, every quiet act of kindness was a step toward a future where she would be seen, heard, and applauded, not because she demanded attention, but because she had earned it through her persistence, talent, and unwavering belief in herself. She had always been quiet, but the quiet hid something deeper. While others chased attention or talked loudly to be noticed, she spent her time exploring the things she loved most. Over time, she discovered that she had talents that others rarely saw. In the stillness of her room, she could spend hours sketching scenes she imagined, giving life to stories in her notebook, or practicing melodies on her small keyboard. These were the things that made her heart feel full, even when no one else seemed to care. Her creativity had always been her secret. At school, her classmates rarely noticed her sketches or the short stories she wrote. Even when a teacher once glanced at her notebook and commented that it was impressive, the acknowledgement faded quickly into the background of everyday life. She wasn't looking for fame or attention, but a quiet part of her wished someone would see her talent and understand it. Yet she did not let the lack of recognition stop her. Instead, she worked harder, practicing each skill quietly, refining every detail until it reflected the best she could do. Drawing had always been her first love. She could take a blank sheet of paper and turn it into something alive. Sometimes she drew people she observed in the streets, capturing the way their hands moved, the curve of their smiles, or the tension in their shoulders. Other times she drew imaginary worlds, Forests with towering trees, rivers that glowed under a moonlight, or cities filled with bustling streets and hidden corners. Each sketch told a story, and through her art she expressed emotions she could never put into words. Writing was her other escape. Her notebooks were filled with characters who faced struggles, moments of joy, and quiet victories. She wrote about young people who were overlooked, who were underestimated by those around them, and how they quietly rose above the noise to find their own strength. It was her way of giving voice to her own experiences and the feelings she often kept locked inside. Sometimes she would read what she wrote aloud to herself, imagining a world where someone actually listened and understood the depth of her words. Music had a place too. She could sit at her small keyboard and play melodies that matched her mood. Some songs were gentle and thoughtful, reflecting the quiet hours of the morning or the softness of sunlight through the window. Others were more intense, filled with the energy of emotions she couldn't easily express. When she played, the world seemed to disappear, leaving only her and the music. Even though no one clapped or praised her, the sound of the notes was enough to make her feel alive. Despite her talents, she was careful about sharing them. She knew how quickly people could dismiss things they didn't understand or didn't value. At school, she sometimes brought a sketch or a short story to class, hoping a teacher might notice, but she never forced it on anyone. She had learned early that her creativity was hers first and recognition would come naturally, not by demanding it. She had patience, a quiet confidence that the work she loved to do would eventually matter in ways she could not yet imagine. She also began to notice small opportunities that others ignored. There were after-school clubs and small competitions that seemed minor, but offered a chance to test her skills. She joined them quietly, not to win applause, but to grow and improve. The first time she participated in a writing contest, she stayed in the background, handing in her entry with a nervous but hopeful heart. Weeks later, when her name appeared as a runner-up, she felt a small spark of pride. It wasn't a loud victory, but it confirmed something important. Her efforts could make a difference. Her art, too, found moments of attention. The school art teacher once displayed her drawing in a corner of the hallway. It wasn't the main showcase, but it was visible to anyone walking by. A few classmates paused to look at it, whispering to each other. She didn't hear all the words, but she caught a few murmurs of admiration. It was a tiny step, but it meant the world to her. For the first time, she realized that her quiet work could reach others, even if the world wasn't ready to fully notice her yet. Despite these small victories, she remained humble. She never boasted or demanded recognition. When classmates asked about her work, she would simply smile and explain politely, never letting pride or arrogance enter her words. She had learned that genuine talent does not need loud announcements. It speaks for itself over time. This belief gave her a sense of peace and allowed her to continue pursuing her passions without distraction or resentment. But it wasn't just talent that defined her. She had a way of understanding people, of noticing things that others overlooked. If someone looked sad in the hallway, she might offer a quiet smile or a small word of encouragement. She never did it to be praised. It was simply part of who she was. Teachers occasionally noticed her empathy, the way she helped younger students or comforted classmates in subtle ways. These gestures, though small, were another layer of her hidden brilliance, a part of her that went far beyond drawing, writing, or music. Her quiet achievements also began to inspire her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Each small recognition, a ribbon for a writing contest, a note from a teacher, a pause of appreciation from a classmate, added fuel to her determination. She realized that even if the world ignored her most of the time, her efforts were never wasted. Every hour spent drawing, writing, or practicing music brought her closer to a moment when the world would have no choice but to see her. She also developed a sense of strategy. She watched carefully how others gained attention, not to imitate them, but to learn. She observed what made people listen, what drew applause, and what captured interest. This was not out of jealousy, but curiosity. She understood that talent alone was not always enough. Timing, presentation, and confidence could make a difference. She began practicing not only her skills, but also the courage to share them when the right moment came. At home, her family continued to support her quietly. They noticed her progress, celebrated her small victories, and encouraged her to keep pursuing what she loved. Sometimes she would sit at the kitchen table with her notebook or her sketches, and her parents would ask questions, show interest, and offer gentle advice. These moments were not just about approval, they were about connection, about someone recognizing her dedication and care. These interactions reinforced her belief that her efforts mattered, even if the larger world hadn't caught on yet. School, however, remained a place where she was often invisible. Classmates still overlooked her in group activities, still laughed at jokes without including her, and still focused on popularity instead of substance. Yet she learned to navigate this environment with patience and resilience. She understood that her path was different from theirs. While they sought immediate recognition, she was building something lasting, something that would not disappear when the applause faded. Her determination also began to attract subtle attention. Teachers started to notice her persistence, the way she always handed in assignments on time, the care she put into every project. They did not always voice their admiration loudly, but their acknowledgement was enough to reassure her that she was on the right path. Even small compliments given quietly felt like sparks of validation that encouraged her to continue growing. She began setting personal goals, challenges that pushed her skills further. She would challenge herself to write more complex stories, to draw with more detail, or to learn new pieces of music that demanded more precision. Each small accomplishment was a victory, even if no one else knew about it. She understood that real growth often happens in silence, far from the noise of applause or recognition. These private victories gave her confidence and strengthened her resolve. Yet she never lost her humility. She understood that talent alone does not make a person great. Kindness, perseverance, and empathy mattered just as much. She carried herself with quiet grace, never seeking to overshadow others or demand attention. This combination of skill, patience, and humility made her not only talented but also deeply admirable in ways that would become clear later. Sometimes, she would watch her classmates who were loud and outgoing, envying the ease with which they drew attention. But the envy was brief. She reminded herself that she had something they did not: depth. While they were caught up in the present, she was building a foundation for the future, quietly and steadily. Her work, her creativity, and her character were all pieces of a puzzle that the world would eventually see, and that gave her hope. As the days turned into months, she continued her quiet journey. Each drawing, each story, each note played on her keyboard was a step forward. She began to feel a sense of purpose, understanding that her talents were not just for herself but could one day inspire others. The small recognitions she had received were enough to keep her motivated, and the larger world remained a mystery she was determined to explore. Through it all, she remained herself, gentle, observant, creative, and patient. The world might still ignore her at times, but she knew that her persistence, her kindness, and her dedication to her passions were preparing her for a moment when she would no longer be invisible. She had discovered the joy of mastering her talents, and that joy was independent of recognition. Yet she could not help but dream of a day when her quiet brilliance would finally shine in front of others, when the world would notice the girl who had always been there, patiently waiting for her time. The school announced a talent competition one morning, and the whole atmosphere changed. Posters went up in every hallway. Teachers reminded students about it during class, and everyone began whispering excitedly about who would participate. The popular students were already planning performances, songs, dances, and skits they knew would draw attention. The hallways buzzed with speculation about who would win, who was the best singer, or who had the funniest joke. She heard the announcements but didn't react at first. Talent competitions were not her usual focus. She had spent years quietly honing her skills in drawing, writing, and music, but she had never performed in front of a crowd. The thought made her nervous. Standing on a stage in front of so many people who had ignored her for years was terrifying. Yet something stirred inside her, a small, insistent voice that said this might be her chance to show what she could do. For days she thought about it. She imagined different ways she could participate. She considered singing, but her voice, though pleasant, was not trained, and she feared being judged. She thought about performing a piece of music on her keyboard, but the idea of playing in front of an audience made her stomach twist. Then she remembered her writing, her stories that had always been her refuge. She realized that maybe the competition didn't have to be just about performance. It could be about expressing herself in a way that mattered most to her. Finally, she made a decision. She would participate. She would write a short story and present it aloud. letting her words speak for her when she could not. The decision filled her with a mixture of excitement and fear.
She had never shared her stories with a large audience.
She had never demanded attention, preferring to remain in the background. But something inside her said it was time. She packed her notebook carefully and carried it home each day, refining her words, practicing the tone of her voice, and imagining the reactions of those who had always ignored her. Her preparation was meticulous. Every afternoon after school, she would sit at her desk with her notebook open and pen in hand. She read her story aloud over and over, adjusting phrases, improving sentences, and making sure each word carried the emotion she wanted to share. She practiced standing tall, even if just in her room, imagining the applause she hoped one day to receive. Sometimes she stumbled over a sentence or her voice faltered, and she felt doubt creeping in. But each time she reminded herself why she was doing this. Not for the applause, not for recognition, but because she deserved to be seen. Her family noticed the change in her. They could see the nervous excitement and the determination in her eyes. They encouraged her gently, reminding her that even the smallest step forward mattered. "It doesn't matter if anyone claps," her mother said one evening. "What matters is that you tried and that your work reflects who you are." These words strengthened her resolve. She realized that her courage to step forward even when scared was a victory in itself. Meanwhile, at school, the competition created waves of gossip. Students whispered about who would be performing, some speculating that she might enter, though they hadn't paid her much attention in the past. A few classmates laughed quietly, assuming that if she did participate, it would be awkward or unnoticed. These whispers stung slightly, but she ignored them. She understood that people often fear what they do not expect, and she would not let their doubt shake her confidence. The day of the competition arrived. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and parents. The stage was bright under the lights, and the murmur of anticipation filled the air. She sat backstage, clutching her notebook, her heart pounding in her chest. She watched other participants perform. Some sang beautifully, others danced with energy, and a few presented skits that drew laughter from the audience. Each performance made her more nervous, but also more determined. She reminded herself that her story was her strength, and no one could take that away from her. When it was her turn, she stepped onto the stage cautiously. The lights blinded her for a moment, and she could feel the eyes of hundreds of people looking at her. For a second, fear almost made her turn back, but she held her notebook tightly, took a deep breath, and began to read. Her voice was soft at first, trembling slightly, but as she continued, it grew steadier. She poured emotion into every sentence, letting the characters' struggles, hopes, and dreams flow through her words. The audience was silent. She could hear the rustle of paper and the quiet breathing of those listening. She noticed a few teachers leaning forward, intrigued, and some students who had previously ignored her now watching curiously. She continued, her confidence building with each paragraph. Her story was not about fame or popularity. It was about resilience, kindness, and finding strength when the world overlooks you. Every word she spoke reflected her own journey, and she realized that this was more than just a competition. It was her chance to finally be seen. By the time she finished, there was a brief pause. Then the applause began. At first it was quiet, hesitant, but it quickly grew louder. Some students who had never spoken to her before were clapping. Teachers smiled proudly, and a few parents in the audience nodded, moved by the depth of her story. She felt a mixture of relief, pride, and disbelief. After years of being overlooked, she had finally captured the attention of the world around her, not through loudness or performance, but through the power of her own voice and talent. The recognition was not just about applause. It was about validation. For the first time, she realized that the skills she had honed in quiet hours, the stories she had kept hidden, and the dedication she had poured into her passions mattered to others. People listened to her not because she demanded attention, but because her work deserved it. The quiet girl who had been ignored was now being acknowledged for her creativity and courage. After the competition, students and teachers approached her. Some congratulated her directly, expressing surprise and admiration. A few classmates asked about her writing, eager to understand how she created such a moving story. Even those who had doubted her abilities began to see her in a new light. She answered their questions modestly, never boasting but feeling an inner pride she had never experienced before. This moment was not just about recognition, it was a turning point, a moment when the world could no longer ignore her presence. Her family celebrated quietly but meaningfully. That evening, they gathered around the table asking her about the competition, the reactions of the audience, and how she had felt on stage. They praised her courage and reminded her that this was only the beginning. "You've shown what you're capable of," her father said. "Now it's time to keep going and see where it takes you." These words reinforced her belief that she could continue to grow, and that recognition was not the final goal. It was a stepping stone toward even greater achievements. The days following the competition were filled with a mix of new experiences. Teachers began inviting her to contribute more actively in class, acknowledging her ideas and talents. Some classmates who had previously ignored her now sought her company or asked for her input on projects. The shift was subtle but noticeable, and it gave her a sense of belonging she had never felt before. Yet she remained grounded. She understood that the applause she had received was temporary, but the skills, perseverance, and courage she had developed were lasting. Even as she enjoyed this new recognition, she continued her private work. She wrote more stories, drew more sketches, and practiced music with renewed energy. The difference now was that she approached her work with the knowledge that it could touch others, that it had the power to inspire and move people. The quiet girl who had spent years developing her talents in secret now had a glimpse of how her abilities could create an impact beyond herself. Her journey was far from over. She still faced challenges, moments of self-doubt, and the occasional feeling of being overlooked. But she had learned a crucial lesson. Recognition often comes when preparation meets opportunity. Her years of quiet effort had prepared her for this turning point, and she understood that persistence, patience, and belief in herself were more important than immediate applause. She also noticed that her courage inspired others, even in subtle ways. Younger students who had seen her perform expressed interest in their own creative pursuits. A classmate mentioned starting a story because she had shown that even a quiet person could capture attention. Teachers remarked that her example encouraged other students to participate in activities they might have avoided. She realized that her impact extended beyond her own recognition. It could help others find their confidence too. By the end of the school year, the memory of the talent competition remained vivid. It was a moment of transformation, a bridge between her years of being overlooked and the beginning of a path where she could be noticed, appreciated, and respected. She understood that this was only the start, that her journey would continue with challenges and successes, but the fear of invisibility that had shadowed her life was finally breaking. In her room that evening, she opened her notebook once again. She wrote not to prepare for the next competition, but to capture the feelings of triumph, courage, and hope she had discovered. She drew sketches inspired by the story she had shared and played music that reflected the emotions of the day. In this private space, she celebrated her growth, understanding that while the world had begun to see her, her own recognition of her strength and talent was the most important victory of all. And so, the girl who had been invisible for so long began to step into the light. Slowly but surely, she had faced fear, embraced her talent, and found a moment where her efforts mattered. It was not just applause, it was a revelation. She had learned that being quiet did not mean being powerless, that patience could lead to opportunity, and that true talent, nurtured with dedication, could never remain unnoticed forever. After the talent competition, everything seemed to change, though not all at once. The quiet girl who had always sat on the edge of classrooms, unnoticed by almost everyone, began to feel the stirrings of something new. People were starting to look at her differently. Some classmates whispered her name in admiration. Others approached her with questions, and a few who had never even spoken to her before began to see her in a new light. It was strange, and at first it made her nervous. She had spent years being ignored. Suddenly, being noticed felt almost unfamiliar. The first day back after the competition, the hallway was busier than usual. Students were sharing stories about the talent show, laughing over some performances and praising others. She walked cautiously, not wanting to draw attention to herself. But this time she didn't go unnoticed. A group of classmates she had barely spoken to stopped and smiled at her. "Hey, that story you read? It was amazing," one said, almost breathless. She felt a small blush rise to her cheeks and murmured a quiet, "Thank you." The words were sincere, but the recognition still felt strange after so many years of silence. Teachers were noticing her too. They had seen her growth in the classroom, But her performance at the talent competition made them realize how much potential she had. One of her favorite teachers, who had quietly supported her over the years, pulled her aside. "You have a gift," the teacher said softly. "I've always seen it, but today the whole school saw it too. Don't let this moment pass without embracing it." She nodded, a mixture of pride and shyness washing over her. For the first time, she realized that her work, her patience, and her effort could truly make people notice, and that was a powerful feeling. It wasn't just teachers and classmates who were affected. Even students who had been distant or dismissive approached her differently. Some were curious about how she wrote her story, asking questions about her characters and her process. Others confessed they had underestimated her, admitting they hadn't realized how talented and thoughtful she was. There were even a few students who had once ignored her in group work or lunches, who now seemed almost eager to include her. It was a strange mixture of pride and disbelief, how quickly people's perceptions could change when they finally saw something they had been missing all along. The girl felt a whirlwind of emotions. She was happy, yes, but she was also cautious. She had learned from years of being overlooked that recognition could be fleeting. Just because people noticed her now did not mean it would last forever. But she allowed herself to enjoy the moment, to savor the applause and the smiles, and to feel the warmth of genuine acknowledgement for the first time in her life. In the following days, teachers began giving her more opportunities. She was asked to share her writing in the school newsletter, to help design posters for upcoming events, and even to assist in mentoring younger students in creative projects. These small tasks, once invisible to everyone, now highlighted her abilities. She found herself busier than ever, but in a good way. Every task was another chance to show her skills, and every recognition, however small, strengthened her confidence. Her classmates' reactions were a mix of admiration and curiosity. Some approached her hesitantly, unsure of how to act toward the girl they had once ignored. Others were openly excited to collaborate with her, asking for her input on projects and ideas. Even the popular students who had never noticed her before now sought her perspective. It was strange to see how quickly the tide had turned. The girl had learned to stay humble, responding politely and thoughtfully, but inside she felt a growing sense of pride and accomplishment. Despite all this, she remained herself. She didn't suddenly become loud or seek attention. She didn't flaunt her talents or demand recognition. Instead, she continued her quiet work, letting her actions speak for themselves. People noticed her more, yes, but she understood that true recognition came from consistency, humility, and dedication. She had been invisible for so long that she knew the value of being genuine and persistent, and she clung to that understanding, even as admiration surrounded her. Her confidence began to show in small ways. In class discussions, she started to raise her hand more often, sharing insights that were thoughtful and well-prepared. When asked for help by classmates, she answered kindly and patiently, never letting pride or frustration enter her words. She found that the more she contributed, the more people respected her. It wasn't the applause that mattered most. It was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that her voice now had weight and meaning. One afternoon, the school organized a project exhibition. Students displayed art, writing, and science projects in the gymnasium, and parents, teachers, and students walked around to observe. The girl had prepared a display of her sketches and stories, carefully arranging each piece so that it reflected her creativity and care. She watched as people approached, reading her stories and examining her drawings. Some teachers nodded approvingly. A few parents smiled in surprise, and even classmates who had never interacted with her before stopped to comment. The exhibition became another stage where her talent could shine, and she felt a quiet pride in knowing her work mattered. The recognition also brought challenges. Not everyone responded positively. A few classmates whispered behind her back, saying she had changed or suggesting that her new visibility made her seem different from before. But she had grown resilient. She understood that people often react to change with doubt or jealousy. She chose to ignore the negativity and focus on those who genuinely appreciated her work and character. She knew that her journey was about personal growth and authentic recognition, not pleasing everyone around her. As the weeks passed, the girl began to notice a subtle shift in herself as well. She was more confident in her abilities, more willing to share ideas, and more willing to take risks. She joined new clubs, participated in school events, and even helped younger students develop their own creative skills. Her quiet determination, once invisible, was now a visible force. People admired her not only for her talent but for her kindness, patience, and resilience. At home, her family noticed the change too. They saw how she carried herself differently, how she engaged more confidently with her peers, and how she found joy in her work in new ways. They continued to support her, celebrating her victories and reminding her that the recognition she was receiving was well-deserved. They emphasized that while applause was wonderful, the most important thing was the growth she had achieved, the courage she had found, and the persistence she had maintained over the years. She also began to reflect on her journey. She thought about the years she had spent being ignored, the moments of doubt and loneliness, and the quiet hours she had devoted to her passions. She realized that those years of patience and effort had prepared her for this moment. Without them, the recognition she was now receiving might not have had the same meaning. She understood that perseverance, even when invisible, had been the foundation of her success. Her classmates' reactions continued to evolve. Some were openly apologetic for having ignored her in the past, while others simply admired her from a distance. She forgave easily, understanding that people often do not recognize the worth of others until they are forced to. She did not hold grudges or dwell on past neglect. Instead, she focused on building relationships based on respect, collaboration, and shared interests. She had learned that kindness and patience were as important as talent in winning respect. The girl also began to inspire others. Younger students looked up to her as someone who had overcome invisibility and emerged with confidence and skill. Teachers used her example to encourage participation, creativity, and perseverance. She became a quiet role model, showing that recognition comes not from being loud or popular, but from dedication, integrity, and the courage to step forward when the opportunity arises. Despite the growing admiration, she remained grounded. She continued to work on her sketches, stories, and music, knowing that her talents were not defined solely by the attention they received. She found joy in creation itself, in the process of bringing ideas to life and in the quiet satisfaction of seeing improvement over time. The recognition she received was meaningful, but it did not define her. Her work, her patience, and her resilience defined her, and that understanding gave her strength. One day, during a school assembly, she was asked to share her story once again, this time in front of the entire school. The memory of the talent competition returned, and a wave of nervousness swept over her. But she stepped onto the stage, held her notebook, and began to read. Her voice was calm and clear, carrying the depth of her emotions and the wisdom she had gained. The audience listened intently, some students leaning forward, teachers nodding, and even the principal watching with a smile. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. She felt a surge of pride, not just for the recognition, but for the journey she had taken to reach this moment. The applause echoed in her mind long after the assembly ended. She understood that being seen was not just about the moment. It was about the years of preparation, the quiet determination, and the courage to step forward despite fear. She realized that the recognition she received now was a reflection of everything she had done in silence, everything she had nurtured in private, and the resilience she had shown when the world ignored her. By the end of that week, the girl had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. She walked with confidence through the hallways, interacted with classmates with ease, and embraced her talents with pride. She had learned that recognition was not the ultimate goal, but it was a sign that her efforts mattered. The girl who had once been invisible had become someone the school admired, respected, and even looked up to. And yet, she remained herself, quiet, humble, and dedicated to her passions. She understood that the applause would fade, that people might again become distracted by popularity and noise, but she had discovered something far more important: the strength to continue, the courage to create, and the knowledge that her talent could shine when she was ready. She had learned that true recognition comes not from others alone, but from the combination of effort, patience, and the willingness to step forward when opportunity arises. The girl had become the one people applauded, but she had also become someone she could admire in herself. She had grown beyond the girl who had once been ignored, emerging with confidence, skill, and resilience. The path ahead was still long, but she had learned that persistence, creativity, and courage would guide her. And most importantly, she had learned that being seen was not about changing who she was. It was about embracing the best parts of herself and letting them shine when the time was right. By the time the school year was approaching its end, the girl who had once been invisible was no longer overlooked. Her talent, patience, and quiet determination had transformed the way people saw her. She had become someone admired not only for her skills but for her courage, kindness, and persistence. What had once been a life of solitude and unnoticed efforts had turned into a journey of recognition and inspiration. The changes did not happen overnight. She still had quiet moments when she reflected on how far she had come. There were times when she walked through the hallways and remembered how invisible she had once felt. She recalled the days of sitting alone in class, the lunches she had eaten by herself, and the group activities where no one included her. Those memories were not bitter. They were reminders of the resilience that had carried her to this point. They reminded her that her victories were earned through years of quiet effort and determination. Her classmates had begun to treat her differently. Many of them now approached her with genuine interest, asking for her thoughts on projects, her input in creative assignments, and sometimes even advice on writing or art. A few who had ignored her for years now confessed that they had underestimated her. Some even apologized not just for overlooking her, but for failing to see the value she carried within herself. She accepted these apologies gracefully, understanding that people often need time to recognize what has been there all along. Teachers, too, continued to encourage her. Her favorite teacher had become a mentor, offering guidance, resources, and opportunities to develop her skills further. They invited her to contribute to school publications, lead workshops for younger students, and participate in community events. These invitations were not just about recognition. They were about trust, acknowledgement, and encouragement to keep growing. Each new opportunity reinforced the fact that she was capable of achieving more than she had ever imagined. Her private life continued to provide strength as well. At home, she remained grounded, supported by family who had always believed in her abilities. They celebrated her achievements quietly, reminding her that her worth was not measured by applause alone. They emphasized that her growth, creativity, and resilience were what truly mattered. This unwavering support helped her maintain humility, even as admiration and recognition spread around her. The girl's story began to inspire others. Younger students saw her example and realized that being quiet or overlooked did not mean being powerless. They watched her navigate recognition with grace and courage, and learned that persistence and dedication could lead to meaningful success. Teachers used her story to encourage students who struggled with confidence, reminding them that talent and hard work often shine most brightly when least expected. She had become a quiet role model, showing that recognition comes not from being loud but from staying true to oneself. As the months passed, she took on new challenges. She entered regional writing contests, submitted her artwork to local exhibitions, and performed her music at small community events. Each step pushed her further out of the shadows she had once known. The nervousness she felt before each event was still present, but it had transformed into excitement and anticipation rather than fear. She had learned to trust herself, to rely on the preparation and practice that had become the foundation of her work. Her perseverance paid off in ways that went beyond applause. She began to see opportunities that had previously seemed impossible. Teachers encouraged her to apply for scholarships, writing programs, and art workshops. Community members who had attended her performances approached her with offers to showcase her talent publicly. The recognition she had quietly hoped for was now becoming tangible. She realized that all the hours spent alone, creating and refining her skills, had built a foundation that could carry her anywhere she wanted to go. Even as the attention grew, she remained humble. She never sought the spotlight for its own sake, and she never allowed admiration to change who she was. She continued to write, draw, and play music for the joy of creation, for the satisfaction of improvement, and for the connection her work could create with others. She understood that recognition was a reflection of her dedication, not a measure of her worth. This awareness gave her a quiet confidence that radiated through her actions and interactions. Her classmates continued to adjust to the new reality. Some embraced her fully, forming genuine friendships built on respect and shared interests. Others, initially hesitant, slowly acknowledged her contributions and talent. She learned to navigate these dynamics gracefully, never allowing past neglect to breed resentment, but using her experiences to guide her relationships with patience and empathy. She understood that people's perceptions could change over time, and she welcomed the chance to build meaningful connections. In the final weeks of school, the girl was asked to present her work at the year-end assembly. This was the largest audience she had ever faced, including not only students and teachers but also parents and community members. She felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but it was accompanied by a steady confidence she had earned over months of preparation and practice. She stood on the stage, notebook in hand, and began to read. Her voice was calm, steady, and full of emotion. She poured herself into the story, each word reflecting her journey, her struggles, and her quiet triumphs. The audience listened in silence, captivated by her words. She noticed teachers nodding, classmates leaning forward, and parents smiling with admiration. When she finished, the applause was immediate and sustained. Some students clapped enthusiastically, others offered quiet smiles of respect, and teachers exchanged glances that spoke of pride and acknowledgement. The girl felt a profound sense of fulfillment. She realized that her efforts, her patience, and her courage had led to a moment where she could not be ignored. After the assembly, many people approached her to express their admiration. Some students who had once overlooked her asked for advice on creative projects. Teachers encouraged her to continue pursuing opportunities beyond the school. Parents and community members congratulated her on her talent and dedication. For the first time, she understood the full impact of her work, not just on herself but on everyone around her. Her talent, once hidden, was now a source of inspiration and encouragement for others. The recognition she received also helped her reflect on her past struggles. She remembered the times she had felt invisible, the lunches she had eaten alone, and the group activities where she had been ignored. Those moments no longer brought sadness but clarity. They had shaped her resilience, honed her talents, and prepared her for the opportunities she now embraced. She realized that being ignored in the past had given her the strength to persevere, the patience to grow, and the humility to handle recognition gracefully. With her confidence growing, she began to mentor younger students. She helped them with writing, drawing, and music, sharing the lessons she had learned about persistence, patience, and self-belief. She encouraged them to pursue their passions quietly but diligently, reassuring them that recognition would come when their dedication met opportunity. In this way, she extended the impact of her journey, using her experiences to uplift others who might be struggling in silence. Her family continued to support her quietly, proud of the person she had become. They celebrated her victories without fanfare, emphasizing the values of humility, perseverance, and integrity. Their encouragement reminded her that while recognition from others was meaningful, the most important acknowledgement came from within, from knowing she had worked hard, stayed true to herself, and grown into someone confident and capable. As graduation approached, the girl had transformed in ways both visible and invisible. She had become a respected student, admired for her creativity, kindness, and resilience. She had experienced the thrill of recognition and the satisfaction of accomplishment. More importantly, she had learned that her worth was not dependent on applause alone but on the combination of talent, effort, and perseverance. The girl who had once been ignored had become someone who could inspire, lead, and create positive change. The day of graduation, she walked across the stage with her head held high. She felt the eyes of her classmates, teachers, and family upon her, and for the first time she felt completely comfortable in the attention she received. The applause was loud, heartfelt, and unbroken. It was not just for her achievements, but for the journey she had undertaken, the quiet girl who had persisted, grown, and finally been seen. After graduation, she looked back on her school years with gratitude. Every moment of struggle, every hour of solitary practice, and every experience of being ignored had contributed to the person she had become. She realized that recognition was not the end of the journey, but a confirmation that her patience and effort had been worthwhile. She had learned the power of resilience, the importance of believing in herself, and the impact of staying true to her passions. Her story continued beyond school. She pursued higher opportunities, continuing to create, write, and share her talents with the world. The lessons she had learned, humility, dedication, and perseverance remained with her, guiding every step of her journey. She carried the understanding that being overlooked does not diminish one's value, and that every quiet effort has the potential to lead to recognition and success. In the years that followed, she often returned to the memory of her early days when she had been invisible. She remembered the loneliness, the moments of doubt, and the times when she wondered if anyone would ever notice her. Those memories were no longer painful. They were a testament to how far she had come. She had transformed her invisibility into strength, her quiet hours into skill, and her patience into recognition. She had become proof that talent, persistence, and self-belief could turn being ignored into being applauded. Through it all, she remained grounded, humble, and true to herself. She continued to create, to inspire, and to mentor others, showing that recognition is not just about applause. It is about the journey, the growth, and the courage to step forward despite fear. She had learned that the most important triumphs are not always loud or public, but they are lasting and meaningful, shaping the person one becomes, and so, the girl who had once been ignored became the one they applauded. She had shown that patience, dedication, and belief in oneself can transform invisibility into recognition, quiet determination into success, and hidden talent into inspiration. She had not just gained applause. She had earned respect, admiration, and the knowledge that her efforts mattered, and that she had the power to continue shaping her own future, quietly, confidently, and brilliantly.